Hello, welcome to the Cunning Plan podcast, to the another episode of What the Fox. So you've caught me wrestling with this bush as it's trying to sort of tickle me throughout. It's going to be distracting, so I'm just moving it slightly. I think that's going to do. Is your bush okay, Ali?
My bush is fine.
Fine,
My
okay.
bush is fine.
The ferns are fine, so that's excellent. Well, we're here today to talk about Instagram stories. Ali recently wrote a blog all about how to make your Instagram stories more interesting, tips to make the most out of them and get better reactions and things like that. But we thought it would be a good idea to kind of go back a little step further and say, why should anyone really care about Instagram stories? What's the point in even following your tips if no one's using these or anything like that? So tell us, just first of all, Instagram stories, what the heck are Instagram stories, Ali?
Yes, so Instagram Stories was something that was introduced a couple of years ago, and it was basically to rival Snapchat. So ever since it started 2 years ago, now over 250 million users are using it on a daily basis, and Instagram just released a stat as well to say that before the stories started, the average user was on Instagram for 24 minutes, and it's now gone up to 32 minutes.
Wow.
So it's like a big jump, and it's definitely like a big competitor to Snapchat. And in all fairness, like, because there's more users on Instagram as well, arguably there could be more users using their stories rather than Snapchat altogether. So it was a big move for them, but it was like a positive move as well for them. So it's and what Instagram Stories is, for those that don't know, is it's up for 24 hours and it's a short clip, photo. So it's basically throwaway content, and you can just upload it. It'll be on your story for 24 hours and then it disappears.
Yeah, and it's a lot less pressure on that, kind of taking the perfect photo and everything like that. They're much more, chucking stuff up there.
Exactly.
Also, I've seen a lot of people doing a lot of live stuff up there.
Yeah, so that was another feature that came later than the stories, but there is the live feature, which again, similar type of thing to the story, where it goes up and then it disappears within 24 hours. But on live, you can record for as long as you want, just like on Facebook Live.
Yeah.
That disappears after 24 hours.
And that's definitely something that I think is over. I've seen more people doing that. Certainly seen like bands and brands and people like that. I've seen doing more Instagram Live than I have doing Facebook Live.
Oh yeah,
Q&As
100%.
and things like that.
I think as well because you tend to find sometimes the quality on Facebook isn't that good, whereas on Instagram it seems to be better quality. It's definitely it has grown a lot, and it is set to continue, I guess.
Cool.
So
let's talk about the importance of the story. So we're not going to be talking about your main Instagram feed here. This is really, really focused on those instant quick fire pieces of content and things like that.
Yeah.
So why should brands be focusing on doing stories, especially if I'm going to put a lot of effort into something that's only there for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Why should I be bothering?
I think one of the main things on Instagram Stories, why it is so popular for brands and celebrities alike, is like it gives users like an insight into like a raw and unfiltered, unfinished version of their lives, their brand. Prime examples of ones that have done really well with this is the likes of like the Kardashian brands. Adidas have done really well with
just
that.
time check. Minutes to a mention of a Kardashian in any Ali podcast is worth like keeping a tab on that. Not many minutes is usually the answer.
Exactly.
Sorry, carry on.
And what they do, they utilise this by like just unfiltered videos of their products or their life in general, and it just makes people a lot more feel like they're more involved with their lives, and especially with brands like the likes of like Adidas and Nike that are huge brands that a lot of stuff is very filtered, and so this way can actually give a more authentic self to the brand. So that definitely allows Instagram Stories to become more personal, and people feel like they can relate to the brand more. That's a really good thing for Instagram Stories. Another big thing, which I think more towards brands and users is like the aesthetic of their Instagram. So because on actual Instagram you post a photo, you filter it, make it look as good as possible. So you want your timeline to look as good as possible. So with Instagram stories, that's a really good thing if you want like a quick bit of content out that won't be up for long and won't require a lot of effort, and then you get that up for 24 hours and then it's gone, so it doesn't affect your page in the slightest. So you can keep that whole aesthetic of whatever image you want it to be without the 24-hour Instagram story ruining it at all. So that's always like a big thing, and I think especially nowadays a lot of pages are purely focusing on their Instagram page. So with this, with the story content, you can provide information without ruining it. And then another thing which Instagram only did recently was on their Instagram stories you can save the stories, so you can use it for later, but you can also pin them to your page. So that's always that's a really good thing. If, say, for a lot of brands, if they have like maybe promotion codes that they want to launch, any other promotional offers that they don't want like clogged up on people's timelines, they can just have these at the top so people can look at them, and gives you more information without ruining the aesthetic of the page.
So that's a massive bonus now, isn't it? That you don't, you're not putting all that effort into something that's only going to be live for 24 hours. You actually potentially you can have that saved and you can pin it, so you know you can do it behind the scenes. And I think that's kind of the difference, isn't it? So if you're doing, I don't know, if you're doing a photo shoot or something like that, the finished photos you might put those up on your Instagram feed. But the process, the kind of the behind the scenes stuff, the people laughing around on set, that kind of stuff is perfect stuff for Instagram stories. And I think the other thing that you mentioned before is the level of interactivity that you can get. So the voting and the other kind of bits of functionality that stories has that you just don't get on a normal Instagram.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to go on to for another good thing about the stories, was the likes of like voting, polls and stuff, which again they only introduced quite recently. But that's where this arguably does overtake Snapchat, because Snapchat doesn't do those features. So whereas where you enter polls, you can ask questions, and it's a good way for especially brands to gauge what their audience is feeling and what they actually want from their page and from their products.
So how does that kind of work? If I'm looking at the feed, how do those polls work? It's just
it's just basically like uploading an Instagram story, and then there is features within like the filters of the Instagram stories where you can get polls, you can ask them questions where people just type in answers, and it's a good way for brands to actually say, like, because I have seen it a couple of times where brands have asked, do you want to see more of this, and then there's like a picture or a video of certain products, certain promotions, so it's a good way for them to gauge basically market research without having to spend a lot of money and time actually trying to figure it out. They can try and gather it from their audience, and it's a good way for them to gauge exactly what it is that they want to put out. So like polls and questions and stuff is also a really good feature on Instagram stories for brands, and again all these things can be like taken down whenever they want. They can be uploaded, they're just there for 24 hours unless you pin them to the page.
I think it's that idea of feeling like you have a really close connection with a brand or someone senior at that brand. And there was one I was looking on last night where someone was it was about a product and they were wanting people to give the feedback on the product, but it was with the creator of this this brand, so they were right there, and I think people are much more likely to go and say something and give some feedback or be constructive if they're not just talking to some faceless company or a consumer research person or something like that. They've got an email through, would you mind spending 2 minutes filling in this form? Instead, this a real person is asking real questions, and you're able to quickly and visually answer those questions. I think it's great.
Exactly. And another really good thing with Instagram stories, like we were saying before, was the live feature, and that definitely is something that does stand out a lot and what a lot of people do utilise, because that again gives you a big insight into someone's brand, image, whatever it is behind the scenes, and that properly is an unfiltered version of them. They can't edit it, and I think that there's pros and cons of both. But that's definitely like a way for actually to gain like their audience's like trust and want them to actually see exactly what there goes on behind the scenes or whatever. And from there, you tend to find a lot of people do have Q&As as well there, because obviously all the comments come up on page and the actual user can see all these comments and they can answer questions if they wanted to. So it's a good way for them to actually, potentially, if done right, a good PR stunt for them that can increase the trust of their brand.
And they get notifications as well at that point. If you go live,
Exactly.
it kind of pops up and says they're live right now, tune in before you miss it or something like those ones. So it's a good call to action to like jump in and see what.
Exactly. And I guess like if you are looking for more like filtered content that you might not like have like the courage to completely bear all, then that is a good thing about Instagram stories as well, because you still have all like the filters, you still have all, you can't edit a photo like Photoshop wise or anything like that, but you can still filter it. You can, and the good thing is you can take them, instead of Snapchat where you can take a photo and then it's there, you can actually gather it from your camera roll. So it might not even be something that you've taken there and then, it could be something you took before that you want to upload. So potentially it still can be a lot edited, it can still look good.
Yeah.
For
so you can like prep those graphics to create a story. So there's no reason that it has to be. We're talking a lot about doing real life, kind of behind the scenes, those kind of things. But you could absolutely do a promotion. You could absolutely create a series of graphics to tell a story and upload those.
Exactly, yeah. And again, going back to the whole pinning thing on Instagram, I think what I've seen with a lot of brands as well is like clothing brands especially, and they have like autumn winter collections or different collections and stuff, and they're very aesthetically pleasing, and on the actual thumbnail of each one you can customize that as well. So again, if it's slightly messy within the story, the thumbnail can be as aesthetically pleasing as possible. So yeah, all these little things does make Instagram stories like, it has the potential to be massive.
So is that more important, would you say, than the timeline itself? You know, I mean, I've seen a lot of people neglecting, and a lot of brands kind of not really focusing on their timeline and really just hammering the stories, because they're doing that instant kind of content, and it's like their story, their main profile hasn't really been updated that much.
Yeah, I think it depends on the actual brand. Like I definitely think with smaller brands that are still trying to grow, then their page is more important, because that's the first thing that consumers see. That's the way you grow your business. But definitely for brands that are like a lot bigger and maybe like they do require a lot more like whether it's research, whether it's they feel like they need to get their image to look slightly better, slightly more trustworthy, then Instagram stories, I would say, arguably is just as important as the actual profile itself. And I think as well, like with brands, even consumers seeing someone's brand that is updated regularly on their stories, and whether that is like question and answers, whether that's behind the scenes, I think all that helps the brand appear more active and appear more like current and accessible, I guess, to consumers. So I would definitely say, depending on the size, it is equally as important as the actual page itself.
I think it's also a lot of it's down to the liveness of it. I think we have check out a blog about how to keep your scheduled content interesting. But that's really true. Is that your Instagram? You can plan that out a week in advance. You can schedule those photos. You can do all that kind of stuff. The sense with the story is this is really happening right now. It's a real thing. It's a bit raw. It's a bit more raw, and I do think that creates more of a kind of an impetus to engage with something rather than that sense of, well, here's your scheduled content that you did when you did it, and hopefully it was still relevant when you posted it, but it might not be anymore. So
exactly. No, I definitely think that with Instagram stories anyway, they are I guess all the features as well on it, like boomerangs that they're introducing a lot more stuff, and it was
Some of those silly ones get a bit annoying after a while, don't they?
Definitely.
That dun 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 one, like, I thought it was brilliant. When that first came out, I thought that is absolute genius. And then
And now it's just
after a while, no, please stop doing it.
Exactly. But yeah, like with all those features, that was to rival Snapchat. But I think especially you do see a lot more brands nowadays choosing to use Instagram over Snapchat, which before was quite like unheard of because Snapchat was the competitive leader. But yeah, so I definitely think with both Instagram stories and Instagram page, you need them both to create a good brand presence and to ultimately grow your audience.
Cool. Okay, so there you go. That is clearly it's really, really important that brands are thinking about this. I mean, last week we talked about why people should be focusing on Instagram and perhaps letting their Twitter fall by the wayside if that's not really where their audience is. And then it's just yet another reason why Instagram is kind of shooting off ahead and is ultimately taken over from the competition. So thanks for joining us. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Do check out our blogs. I'll put some links below to a previous podcast about why you should be thinking about Instagram. Some tips Ali's written about how to do Instagram stories, how to make them more interesting. Definitely worth checking out. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.